Hello, quick little knife review for you today. This is the Honey Badger. Now, I am several years behind the 8 ball on this one, but do you remember when everyone was talking about the Honey Badger? Why? Well, I think it was because it was a pretty affordable, very sort of snappy little flipper. And flippers used to be the tits. Everyone wanted a flipper. It was like the coolest mechanism. Now we're all back into button locks and geez, I reckon even the reverse, what's it even called? The front flipper, I reckon even they're old hats now. So you know what? This was very much a 2019 era knife, I reckon. Reminds me of that sort of period in the knife hobby. FRN handles and a flat ground blade with a really big old thumb hole there, and of course the flipper. You get these in a few different steels, 8CR13, MOV, D2, and according to the website, black. So this is the D2 version here. I've carried this since I got it from Gab, so I've carried this for about 5 or 6 days. Have used it just for my general house tasks, you know, making my sandwiches, cutting up my cardboard boxes, things that I use my pocket knife for all the time, which is a real kind of array of tasks, you know. I never really know what's going to happen in a day, but usually the knife gets used for at least 1 or 2, you know, pretty decent little jobs. What do I like about the knife? I like the handle. I like the handle's comfort. It's got a generally ergonomic, nice neutral handle with sort of like an oversized index scallop, which is just fine with me. I think most hands would fit the Honey Badger pretty well. I think they make a few different sizes, a few different blade types, but generally the Honey Badger is going to look like this. I like the FRN texturing. I like FRN as a handle material. Also, some people think it's a bit cheap feeling. I got no problem with it whatsoever. I think it looks nice. I really like the pattern, and it's really nicely finished, nicely molded FRN. It looks good. The Honey Badger logo is nice and detailed, intricate. It feels like almost Spyderco quality FRN. Like it feels absolutely, you know, good. Getting out my thesaurus there, I settled on good. But anyway, it's got a deep carry pocket clip, which is reversible, which carries a knife just fine in your pocket. I like my pocket knives to be deep carry. I like to have them so, you know, it's harder to see. Could just be a pen, you know, to the outside observer. And so that's fine. I like the action. The action is probably what got the knife, you know, its fame or its desirability back when it was like the knife to try. And yeah, the action is really nice, and it is a fun little fidgetable knife to play with. The liner, of course, is a liner lock, a small piece of sprung steel in between those 2 plastic or FRN handles, and yeah, locks up nice and tightly. Mechanically speaking, this knife is really well put together. There is very little blade play up and down. Side to side, you can feel a slight bit of wiggle, but nothing crazy. It's certainly because I'm looking for it, really. Not going to cause me any problems. And in my day-to-day use, I found no issues at all with it. Even though it is slightly thicker stock compared to some other knives, it certainly seems to come down to a thin enough behind the edge, and the initial factory edge that came was performing really, really well. For me, I'm a steel guy. I like to see how steel performs. I've got a couple of other D2 knives around at the moment. I line this guy up next to my Civivi Elementum fixed blade and put the same edge on both of them. I put a 17 degree per side, 1000 grit edge, which was then stropped on my Tormek on both of these guys here, and cut next to them, you know, cut the same cutting test side by side pretty much, one after another, and found that these guys held an edge against twisted sisal rope for the exact same amount of time. Both of them cut through the twisted sisal rope 350 times before they no longer sliced easily through a held sheet of paper. So that's like only testing absolute sharpness. Both finished the tests, still very much sharp knives, just no longer acutely sharpening with a single glide and starting to hiccup on my paper. So they both, as far as edge retention goes, are about the same quality of steel in terms of they'll last against your abrasive cutting for about the same. The grinds are going to perform a bit different. The hollow grind on the Civivi I would actually prefer for everyday carry use than the flat grind here. Flat grinds are a little bit stronger perhaps in terms of lateral stress, perhaps a little bit less likely to chip out, although we'll talk about that in a second. And in general terms, the more all-around grind is the flat grind. But for EDC tasks, I like the hollow because I don't abuse my EDC knives, and hollow knives just slice like something else. Got those nice air pockets, you know, reduce the surface tension as you cut through things like cheese and cardboard. Anyway, but I then moved on to some basic, like, as more of a test more than anything, but some people do it with their EDC knives. I shaved a bit of wood, and that's where I noticed that the Civivi did absolutely fine, and the Honey Badger really chipped out, fairly markedly in the, the main portion of the blade I was using to do my wood shaving. So, 17 degrees, pretty acute, so definitely more of a testing edge. Maybe if I'd left it at 20, it wouldn't have had a problem. But I did notice that I did this one first, and I did less of it than I did with the Civivi, because when I noticed it on this guy, I thought, well, let's try and replicate that on the Civivi. And so I even got out my nasty redwood, which is a lot worse wood. It's kind of all twisted and gnarled and much harder. And even still, no edge damage at all to the Civivi. And I bet it's still probably, still glides through a sheet of paper, where the Honey Badger now has a couple of real sort of hiccup chips in there that stop and really grab, and you can see them with the naked eye. So there you go. Probably a similar D2, but a slightly less stable D2 here on the Honey Badger. So if you're going to get a Honey Badger, I'd suggest, if you're going to use it for anything harder, keep that edge nice and thick. Otherwise, just use it with care, I suppose, would be my example, based on the D2 that I've used in this knife specifically. So there we are. Maybe it's a bit too, maybe it's hard, like too hard for torsion type stuff. Like maybe it's at 61 or 62 or something. Don't know, couldn't tell you. But as a EDC knife, it's probably not something that would cause you a huge amount of problem on a day-to-day basis anyway. Just thought though, you watch this channel probably for my thoughts on steel. That's my thoughts on the D2 in the Honey Badger. So there we go. Look, overall, it's a pretty affordable knife. I noticed on the box that Gav had sent it in that this may be $150, $140 in Australia, perhaps at retail. I wouldn't pay that for this knife. I would pay maybe $70 to $80 for this knife in Australia, because other companies, Spyderco will sell you a Tenacious for about 90 bucks in Australia, and it's definitely about as good as a Tenacious, if not slightly weaker, owing to that sort of oddness that happened on that edge there. And I'm looking at it now, and it is quite, quite chippy and quite bendy and quite, got a few scars. You wanna know I got these scars? I was used to cut up fat wood. So that's what happened. So yeah, I wouldn't pay $140 for it, most likely not. But under 100 bucks, could be fine if you have to. Just basic, good flipper, comfortable handle, D2, something to maybe use and forget about, whatever. No worries, I'd be okay with that. The Honey Badger company seems to be a South African design house that then gets the knives made in China. This knife says it is made in China. And just so we know, this is the HB1015 Honey Badger Flipper D2 LR Medium Tan. So that's what we're looking at today. So yeah, those are my thoughts on it. It's about the most okay knife ever. It is just okay, it is not bad, it is not good, it is just an okay knife. And if you're after just an okay knife that does have some nice action, and if you really are enamored with the blade shape and like the look of the honeycomb handles, then hey, buy and be happy. Although just be aware of my little snafu on the woodwork in there, and go armed with knowledge, my friends. That's a quick review for you. I'll see you all in the next film. Goodbye.